Welcome to FireSide Stories, where we aim to delight and fright you with wonderful tales from all corners of the world. So please, sit back, enjoy some tea, and let's begin with a tale about the Last Legion. Many years ago, a great civilization ruled most of the world. Their influence could be felt from the ancient pyramids of Egypt to the stoic citadels of Greece. The strength of their power lay on the feet of their soldiers, and soldiers they had to spare. For everywhere this legion went, they conquered. They ruled with an iron fist, their Caesar's words, their commandments. But for all the power this legion possessed, all their might and forces, there was a place that remained unconquered. This place lay on the very edge of the Legion's boundary. The Dark Lands, they called it, filled with ancient magics and druids of old. This is where our story starts. The last legion of this once mighty civilization stands, watching over the lost Dark Lands before them, their strength now powerless, and their minds wandering of ancient creeds. Two guards stand resolute before an ancient wall, its stones carved from a forgotten time, and its presence foreboding and endless. "It's amazing how something so small can make you feel so powerless," said Silas, the taller of the two soldiers, his pale blue eyes wandering over the cracks and moss covering the wall before them. His companion looked at him with the wild eyes of youth and ignorance. "Nothing can compare to the power of Rome. Why you fear such a small broken wall is lost on me, Silas." Silas turned to look down at the young man. "There are some things lost to us, Eridus. Have you ever tried to grasp sand? The harder you hold on, the quicker it falls from your grasp. That is what Rome has become now, a desperate grasp for what we once had. Do not be so easily swayed by what they say, Eridus. There are things far older than Rome." Eridus, with anger in his eyes, began to speak when a sound pulled him out of his retort. It sounded like a whisper. No, like a breath maybe. It drew Eridus's eyes deep into the darkness over the wall. Beyond and into the forest, he searched, ready to act upon finding the source of its location. Silas watched him with experienced eyes, cautious and curious as to what the young man would do. "What is that noise?" whispered Eridus. Silas smiled softly at the young man's discomfort. "Don't tell me a mighty soldier of Rome is scared of a little noise." The whisper echoed again, and both men turned sharply at the closeness of the sound. Silas's experienced eyes focused sharply as his gaze fell on the mists before the forest. And as clear as day he saw it, a light coming through the mists. He began to call out to summon the wanderer closer, when he realized the floating light couldn't be from a torch, for it was blue as the sky. His breath caught as he tried to speak. That was no person. Eridus followed Silas's bewildered gaze and drew his spear to march beyond the wall. Silas's arm fell quickly on his companion's shoulder, grasping him tightly, his eyes never leaving the blue light in the mist. His voice was hard when he next spoke. "Do not cross the wall, Eridus. Our orders are to remain at post, and some things should not be disturbed." Eridus shrugged Silas's hand off of his shoulder. "I am not scared, Silas. Unlike you, I continue to hold Rome in my heart. Whoever is out there should not be this close to the wall. They must be told to move on. If you are too scared, then remain here, for I will go." Silas's eyes remained fixed on the light. It drew him in and entranced him. He watched its blue flames dance among the mist for what he thought was a few seconds, for as he turned to speak with Eridus, he was already over the wall and marching towards the dancing flame. "No! Eridus! Come back!" Silas tried to shout, but when the words left his mouth, they were a mere whisper. He tried again, and the same occurred. He watched Eridus march confidently through the dancing mist, as it swirled and wrapped around him like 1,000 grasping hands. Eridus was oblivious, as the mist seemed to cover him more and more, pulling him deeper towards the forest. Conflicted, Silas gripped his spear tightly, his knuckles whitening from the intensity of his fear. Startled by the sight of the mist, Silas jumped into action. For all the young man's ignorance, he was still Silas's responsibility, and with a determination that only comes from experience, Silas vaulted over the wall and into the mist. Eridus wanted to turn back. The sweat pooled on his back as his legs moved shakily through the wet grass. His breath became visible as the air got cold around him. He felt something brushing along his arm. He quickly turned, spear ready, to nothing but mist. He felt something again brush his calf. He stepped back quickly and turned again, striking the air as the mist danced around his spear. A giggle broke through the air. It sounded like a child. Eridus's voice broke as he called out, By order of Caesar, I, Eridus Lucius Malleus, order you to move past this mist and return to your home, or I will be forced to hold you under arrest for trespassing on Caesar's lands. A voice giggled again, and the blue wisp moved frantically away. This land has stood for 1,000 years with no Caesar. Our God is the earth. Our laws are the sea and sky. The Caesar is nothing to us. Eridus was outraged by their slander. How dare you speak of Caesar that way? Rome is eternal, and his right to rule divine by the gods themselves. He stepped forward towards the fleeing light. Come back and face the might of Rome. Another giggle, and Eridus's anger stirred greater, fear leaving him now, as he went after the light. Silas watched as Eridus took off into the forest. He turned to call out to him, but no words left his dry mouth. As he walked through the mist, a feeling came over him, one he had had many times before in battle. He was being hunted. He could not pinpoint where, but he knew they were close. Silas moved with cautious steps. As he walked, he tried to whisper, Eridus, come back! But the fog was so heavy, he could barely see ahead of him. He felt like he was swimming, the fog now suffocating, claustrophobic and endless. Silas tried to remember where he last saw Eridus, and continued to push forward. He could hear whispers in the mist, and as he turned, they disappeared only to start somewhere else. He had seen this kind of tactic used in combat before. He shook his head to regain his composure, and with a fixed determination, he kept walking. Eridus ran. His legs began to burn from the excursion. This person he was chasing was fast. He ran blindly through the thick fog, his only focus the light before him. Just when he felt he was gaining, his foot caught on something and he fell hard to the ground, dropping his spear. As he shook his head and slowly stood, he looked down, towards his ankle, to see he had gotten caught on a tree root. He prized his foot free from it, checked for any injuries, and when satisfied all was well, he put light pressure on the ankle. It throbbed in response, and Eridus took in a sharp inhale. He tried again, slower this time, and was satisfied he could walk slowly on the ankle. Eridus turned towards the sound. The fog wasn't so heavy now. It sat just up to his knees. Everything else was clear, for the full moon lit up the world around him, and Eridus knew he had made a terrible mistake. He stood in a thick forest now. Disorientated, he turned back the way he came, only to see thick branches and roots of trees blocking his path. He was so sure he had come that way. Eridus's breath became heavy, his eyes searching for the source of the sound. He felt something grab his cloak and he turned sharply, a furious wild blaze in his eyes, to see his cloak was caught on a gnarled tree branch, reaching out with grasping twisted fingers. Eridus quickly tore off his cloak and looked around, desperate for a spear. The fog on the ground was so thick he couldn't see his hands as he plunged them into their secrets. He crawled on his hands and knees, frantic until he felt something long and cold. He grabbed it furiously and raised it from the mist. Silas was still searching for Eridus when he came to an abrupt stop, as a blood-curdling scream filled the forest night. It echoed all around him. He couldn't place the direction. "Eridus!" he shouted. Another giggle broke through the forest night. Silas stilled his breath and walked on. He ignored the giggles and snaps of twigs, the whispers at his neck, and the grasping hands of the mists and trees. And still he walked on, breath slow and pace steady. Silas would not be deterred. Eridus crawled away in panic, grasping his right hand, desperately looking for the demon that had now come from the mists. For when he grabbed his spear, it arose from the mist in his hand, scaled and twisted. A large set of yellow eyes turned to meet his, and it opened its large mouth to expose two dagger-like fangs and sunk them into the flesh of his right hand. Eridus had screamed in pain and grasped at the demon's head to tear it from his hand, but before he could set a finger upon it, it released and backed away, slinking into the mists, its form now invisible and lurking anywhere near his feet. Eridus backed into an old tree, and he scrambled to get as high out of the mists as possible, but there was nowhere for him to go. The old tree was long dead, and the branches snapped whenever Eridus pulled at them. His arm seized in pain, and he paused to look upon it. Two big holes lay upon his hand, still weeping a strange yellowish liquid, and the area around them was blackish and bruised, slowly spreading up his hand towards his arm. The muscles again seized in pain, and he let out another gasping scream as he clutched his hand again. He tried to shake his head to refocus, but his vision started to go blurry, and legs began to feel weak. He rested on his knees and held one of the dead tree branches in his left hand, waiting to strike if he saw the demon again. But it didn't come. He could hear it slithering around, moving through the mists, leaving trails of weaving smoke as it went. The whispers grew louder, and Eridus was beginning to see the shadows of the trees move around him. With each whisper, he could see a shadow figure lurking nearby, their yellow eyes peering through the trees. Then one of the shadow figures stepped out of the darkness, their figure changing as it was touched by the moonlight. It was a woman, or it used to be a woman, from what Eridus could tell. She was wrapped in deer hides of shades of white, and her long brown hair was braided thickly and hung loosely at her shoulders. It was her face that caused Eridus to almost yelp into the night again, as her face was that of a deer skull, and its long antlers sat atop her head, her yellow eyes peering through at Eridus. She walked slowly through the mists, and they parted for her. The forest went silent, the whispers stopped, and the mist seemed to halt in anticipation. Then the woman spoke. "Here you come, to my land, and threaten my people. Tell me, boy, why have you wandered from your little wall?" Eridus was frozen in fear. His arm was throbbing now, and he struggled to focus on her words as they danced in the air towards him. I have my orders. You were too close to our wall. I have my orders." She walked closer, though to Eridus's eyes she seemed to dance along the open path before her. Gentle bells dangled on her ankles as she sauntered over to him, making beautiful music as he watched her. "That may be so. So let me judge the strength of your character." Where is your home, little boy? Who resides in your heart? If I were to cut you open from stem to stern, would you bleed purple? She came so close now, Eridus could feel her breath on his face. He couldn't focus. Everything was beginning to seize in pain. His legs, his arms, his chest began to feel tight, and it was getting harder to speak and breathe. My home is Caesar. My heart is Rome. And if you were to cut me right now, I would bleed for my Caesar. The creature before him scoffed at his words, her breath coming through the deer skull in big puffs. This is the free land, boy. There has been no Caesar here for 1,000 years, and there will be no one after when the Caesar is long gone. Tell me, do you feel the ground, the air, the very trees around you? Of course you do. This land is steeped in ancient beings, and they still walk the land hand in hand with their people. Your gods abandoned you long ago, and your Caesar has come to try to take mine, but he failed, and now he is gone. He has abandoned you. Tell me, have you ever seen him? Talked to him? Known his immense power? Learnt his ancient wisdom? Eridus shook his head slowly. He turned and looked up at the woman before him. Honor and glory, Eridus managed to whisper. He put all his might into one act of violence and swung the dead tree branch at the creature before him. She easily moved out of the way and stood back. Still trapped, your mind and heart are unwilling to change. She sighed softly, and her words sounded sad. The woman turned from Eridus and walked back into the shadows of the trees. Eridus watched her go. There was a strange sadness to him now, and he didn't understand why. He felt something move along the mists by his legs, then his shoulders, and then around his waist. He looked down to see the yellowed eyes once again, and for his final time, Eridus closed his eyes. After walking for what felt like hours through the endless mists, Silas began to see the forest change around him, the mists beginning to settle, and a path opened up before him. He paused before pushing on, calming his mind and steadying his hand. Then he stepped through, and was met by an open clearing, a henge of stones encircling him as tall as houses. He marvelled at their size and design, and their engineering. And when he turned back to see the path he just walked through, he was met by a wall of mist once again. A soft jingle of bells sounded behind him, and Silas turned to view the centre of the clearing to find a strange creature watching him. A woman or a deer? He couldn't tell. She was so tall he felt like a child as she stood before him. Then she spoke, and the cadence of her voice silenced Silas's fears and whispered to his heart. You didn't follow the Whisps. You followed your instinct and trusted your heart. Tell me, where is your home? Silas stood and spoke slowly. Where is Eridus? The young man who was with me. Did you hurt him? The woman cocked her head slowly to one side and rested against a large stone in the centre of the henge. His heart was untrue. I laid not one finger on him. I simply asked the same questions I offer you, and the land deemed him unworthy. So, again I ask, soldier, where is your home? Silas watched. The woman was unarmed, and her words felt strangely true to his heart. He paused for a while, before responding. My heart is the earth I sleep on, the stars above my head, and the fire at my feet. My home has been a winding path for many years." The woman let out a soft chuckle, filling the air around her with her breath in the cold night air. She moved away from the wall slowly, her steps light, and jingled with every step as she swayed through the grass towards Silas. "Who holds your heart?" The grip on Silas's spear became relaxed, and his head swayed almost rhythmically with her steps as her bells sang their music to him. Silas answered before he could stop himself. "My heart belongs to the forest, my blood the sea, and my bones to the mountains. I will return to whence I came and be a part of everything once again." Silas's pale blue eyes stared deeply and solemnly into the woman's eyes behind her mask. He saw the flicker of a smile. She stepped back, and her bells played their music again. The mist opened before Silas, and she waved her hand. "Your heart is true. You may have safe passage through my land, and return to your small wall and your Caesar." Silas turned and looked at the path before him, but kept the corner of his eye on the woman in the centre of the henge. His feet were starting to walk back to the wall, but his heart was being pulled by the whispers of the wind. Then he heard the bells once more and stopped. He didn't turn back to face her. "Unless you would like to stay and walk my lands, learn my ways, and live among giants and gods alike, there is a place for you here. If you would like, Silas." Silas stood on the boundary between the mist, his feet beckoning him forward, his training urging him back to the wall, but his heart waiting to hear those bells once more. Then he turned and looked back at the woman in the centre of the henge, and the mist closed behind him. The wisps are said to show you to your fate, your glory, or your demise. So, the next time you see a flickering light in the path before you, be careful where you step, for it may not lead you where you want.